The desert night was quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the wooden barn sound louder than it should. The cowboy sat on the porch, hat tilted low, pipe smoke curling into the chill air. He thought the evening would pass like any other, just him, the stars, and the endless stretch of sand. But fate had a way of testing men who thought they had already endured enough. A faint rustling came from the barn. At first he thought it was a coyote nosing around for scraps, but when he rose and pushed the door open, his hand resting near the grip of his revolver, he found something that froze him in place. Huddled in the straw, barely breathing, was a boy, a native child, no older than 10. His clothes torn, his skin bruised, and his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. The cowboy didn't move right away. He knew what this meant. A child like this didn't just wander alone into the night. Someone was chasing him, someone dangerous. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the boy's hand clutching a small stone knife, the cowboy's shadow looming in the lantern light. Slowly, carefully, the cowboy crouched and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Easy now, son. Ain't here to hurt you." The boy didn't answer, but his grip on the knife trembled. The cowboy saw the hunger in his eyes, the exhaustion in the way his body sagged against the straw. With a sigh, he set his revolver aside, pushed a canteen toward him, and waited. Minutes passed before the boy's thirst overcame his suspicion. He drank deeply, coughing as the water rushed down. That night stretched on with questions unspoken. The cowboy tended the boy's cuts, fed him a piece of cornbread left from supper, and laid a blanket over him. The boy never gave his name, never gave his trust, but in the silence, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of understanding. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it a warning the cowboy could not ignore. He had lived long enough on the frontier to know trouble was on the horizon. The way the boy flinched at every sound, the way he refused to sleep until exhaustion forced him. It all told a story the boy himself could not. And when the first light of dawn began painting the desert sky in red and gold, the cowboy already knew the truth. Whatever he had done by taking the child in, it had set wheels in motion that could not be stopped. He stepped outside, stretching against the morning chill, and froze. The ground shook with the rhythm of hooves. Across the plain, rising out of the haze of dust, came a sight that would make most men's blood run cold. 200 native warriors, lined up in silence, their eyes fixed on the barn where their child now rested. The cowboy's hand instinctively dropped to the butt of his revolver, though deep down he knew iron and bullets would do little against such a force. 200 warriors, silent as stone, horses standing firm, their faces painted with the marks of war. The morning sun caught on the steel of their weapons, flashing like fire against the desert sand. For a long moment, no one moved. The cowboy stood there on the porch, the weight of the child's trust heavy on his shoulders, the kind of weight that could bend a man's life in ways he never imagined. The boy stirred inside the barn, his small feet padding on the wooden boards, and stepped out into the pale light. When he saw them, his people, he froze. His lips parted, but no sound came. He looked up at the cowboy, eyes wide with fear, as if unsure whether stepping forward meant salvation or doom. The cowboy knelt beside him, keeping his voice low and steady. "Whatever happens, you stay behind me, you hear?" The boy gave the smallest nod, though his body trembled. The cowboy straightened, squaring his shoulders as though he'd been preparing for this moment his whole life. He knew enough about men and tribes to understand one thing clearly. They would not ride out in such numbers unless something greater than pride had been wounded. This wasn't a raid, wasn't a casual show of force. They had come for the boy. The leader broke from the line, riding forward with measured steps. He was a tall man, his long hair streaked with gray, his presence commanding even without a word. His horse's hooves struck the earth with a sound that echoed in the cowboy's chest. The other warriors remained still, their eyes following every twitch, every breath. The leader halted a short distance away, his gaze falling first on the boy, then on the man who stood protectively over him. The cowboy tipped his hat but did not step aside. In that silence, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. The boy whispered something in his own tongue, words the cowboy couldn't understand. But the leader's eyes narrowed, and his hand tightened on the reins. The cowboy felt the tension coil tighter, like a rope pulled too far. He wanted to speak, to explain, But he knew one wrong word could turn this standoff into bloodshed. Instead, he let his presence speak, calm, steady, unflinching. He had taken the boy in, not knowing what storm it would bring. But now that it had arrived, he would not run from it. The boy pressed against his side, seeking shelter in the shadow of the man who had shown him kindness when no one else had. And as the wind stirred the dust at their feet, the cowboy understood that this was no accident, no twist of chance. This was the beginning of something larger, something that would test his strength, his loyalty, and his soul. The eyes of 200 warriors bore into him, waiting for his next move, and the fate of one child balanced on the edge of his choice. The cowboy knew a man could die from silence just as easy as from a bullet. The air between him and the mounted warriors was stretched thin, fragile as glass. Every horse's snort, every rattle of a bridle felt like a drumbeat to war. He pulled in a slow breath, his boots rooted on the porch as though the boards themselves held him steady. The boy clung to his side, eyes darting between the familiar faces of his people and the stranger who had become his shield. Finally, the cowboy spoke, his voice deep but calm, carrying across the distance. The boy was hurt. Found him near dead in my barn. I gave him water, food, and a place to rest. That's all. His words were plain, stripped of pride or excuse, for he knew these men had no patience for lies. The leader's eyes, dark as storm clouds, flicked to the boy again, searching his expression. The boy took a hesitant step forward, torn between blood and safety. His lips moved, a whisper carried on the breeze, but too faint for the cowboy to catch. Whatever he said, it made the warriors murmur, a ripple moving through their ranks. The leader raised a hand, and silence fell again. He dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate, and stepped closer until the space between them was only a few strides. The cowboy's hand hovered near his revolver, but did not draw. He held his ground, not as an enemy, not as a supplicant, but as a man with nothing to hide. The leader studied him, his lined face unreadable, and for a heartbeat the cowboy wondered if this was the end. Then the man spoke, his voice low and steady, though the cowboy couldn't catch every word. The tone was clear, a warning, a question, perhaps even a test. The boy's small hand tightened on the cowboy's coat, as if begging him not to falter. The cowboy gave the slightest nod, more to the child than to the warriors, and answered with the only truth he had. If you aim to take him, you'll have to come through me first. His words carried no boast, no threat, only iron resolve. The leader's eyes narrowed, and then for the first time a flicker of something else crossed his face. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a spirit cut from the same hard cloth. He turned, mounting his horse once more, and lifted a hand. At once, the warriors pulled their horses back a few paces, the earth trembling under the weight of so many hooves. The cowboy did not relax, did not exhale, but he knew one thing. The storm had not passed. It had only been delayed, and when it returned, it would decide not just the fate of the boy, but the measure of the man who had chosen to stand for him.